Picture this. You're sitting in a lawyer's office, expecting to inherit your grandmother's house, maybe some savings, when suddenly the lawyer reads a name you've never heard before getting everything your family worked for generations. Now imagine that stranger is a waitress at a rundown diner, and your whole family is laughing, calling your grandmother crazy. But what I discovered about this woman changed everything I thought I knew about family, sacrifice, and what it really means. To love someone unconditionally, this is that story. The funeral parlor smelled like lilies and old wood polish, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes for days afterward. I sat in the front row of Mercy Baptist Church in Millbrook, Texas, population 3,000 and shrinking, watching my grandmother Eleanor's casket being carried by 6 men who'd known her their entire lives. The whole town seemed to be there, filling every pew, spilling into the aisles. Everyone loved Grandma Eleanor. My cousin Jake leaned over, his cologne mixing unpleasantly with the flower arrangements. Can you believe she lived in that old house for 60 years, never spent a dime on herself? My Aunt Patricia nodded, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that looked more for show than actual tears. All that money she saved, working double shifts at the textile factory, pinching every penny. Uncle Robert adjusted his tie, already calculating numbers in his head. The house alone is worth at least $400,000 now, with all the development coming to town and her savings account. She never touched her retirement. I wasn't thinking about money, I was thinking about Saturday mornings when I was 8 years old, sitting at her kitchen table while she made pancakes from scratch, telling me stories about her childhood during the Depression. She'd always end with the same words, "Marcus, honey, remember that family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up when everyone else walks away." 3 days later, we gathered in lawyer Benjamin Morrison's office on Main Street. The building was one of those old Victorian houses converted for business, with creaky floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed by. Morrison had been practicing law in Millbrook for 40 years, had handled 3 generations of our family's legal matters. He cleared his throat and opened a manila folder that seemed too thin for a lifetime of accumulated wealth. Eleanor Williams made some specific requests about how this should be handled, Morrison began, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. She wanted the family present, and she wanted me to read this exactly as she wrote it. He unfolded a handwritten letter, her familiar cursive filling 2 pages. "To my beloved family," he read aloud. "By the time you hear this, I'll be dancing with your grandfather in heaven. I've lived a blessed life, surrounded by people I love, but there's something you need to know, something I've carried for the past 5 years. The room was dead silent. Jake stopped fidgeting with his phone. Patricia sat straighter. Uncle Robert leaned forward. Morrison continued reading. "There's a young woman named Sarah Chin. She's 26 years old. Works at Murphy's Diner on Highway 87 for 5 years. She's been like a daughter to me. Though none of you ever met her, she took care of me when I was too proud to ask family for help. She drove me to doctor appointments, picked up my groceries, sat with me during the long nights when the loneliness felt like it might swallow me whole." My heart started pounding. I looked around the room at my family's faces, seeing my own confusion reflected back at me. None of us had heard this name before. Jake's wife Michelle whispered, "Who is Sarah Chun?" "Sarah never asked for anything." Morrison continued reading. "When I offered to pay her for gas money, she refused. When I tried to give her money for groceries, she'd sneak it back into my purse. She worked double shifts at the diner to pay for her little brother's medical bills, sometimes going without meals so he could have his medicine. She has a broken hand right now from an accident at work, but she still comes by every evening to check on me." Uncle Robert interrupted. "Excuse me, Benjamin, but where is this going?" Morrison held up his hand. "Please, let me finish. She reminds me of myself at that age, trying to hold a family together through sheer determination and love, and that's why I've made my decision." The words that came next felt like a punch to the chest. "I leave my entire estate, including my home at 1247 Oak Street, my savings account, and all personal belongings, to Sarah Chin. She is the daughter I never had, and she's shown me more love in 5 years than most people see in a lifetime." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jake burst out laughing, a harsh sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "This is insane, Dad. Can we contest this?" She was obviously manipulated by some gold-digging waitress. Patricia's voice was shrill. "A stranger, some Chinese girl we've never even met, gets everything Mama worked her whole life for. This is ridiculous." Uncle Robert was already standing, pacing behind his chair. "There has to be something we can do, Benjamin. My mother wasn't in her right mind. Clearly someone took advantage of an elderly woman. But I remembered something else about Grandma Eleanor. She was sharp as a tack until the day she died, could still beat me at checkers, and remembered every birthday, anniversary, and graduation in our extended family. If she made this decision, She had her reasons. Morrison set the letter down. Eleanor anticipated your reaction. She asked me to tell you that this decision was made with a clear mind and loving heart. She also left individual letters for each of you. He handed out sealed envelopes, each one addressed in her careful handwriting. I tore mine open. Immediately inside was a single page. My sweet Marcus, it began. You're the only one who might understand. You have your grandfather's heart, and you've always seen people for who they truly are, not what they can give you. Sarah is special. Honey, she's been through more hardship than anyone should face, but she never lost her kindness. Find her. Talk to her. You'll see what I saw. I love you always, Grandma Eleanor. The others were reading their letters, faces growing redder by the minute. Jake crumpled his up and threw it in the trash. Guilt trips and manipulation, that's all this is. Patricia was crying again, but this time the tears seemed genuine. She says she knew we were busy with our own lives, that she didn't want to be a burden. How were we supposed to know she needed help? Uncle Robert's letter seemed longer than the others. He read it twice before folding it carefully and putting it in his jacket pocket. When he looked up, his expression had changed. She mentioned specific things only she would know about my childhood, my struggles with drinking, how she helped me get back on my feet 20 years ago. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly what she was doing. The meeting ended with Lawyer Morrison explaining the legal process, how the will was ironclad, how Grandma Eleanor had updated it just 6 months ago with full mental capacity evaluations. As we walked out into the bright Texas afternoon, my family was already making plans to contest the will, to hire investigators, to prove that this Saracen was a con artist. But I had different plans. I was going to Murphy's Diner sat on a stretch of Highway 87 that had seen better days. Probably back when Eisenhower was president. The building was one of those classic railroad car diners, all chrome and red vinyl, with a neon sign that flickered between open and op-end. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds growing through, and the whole place had that worn-down look of a business hanging on by sheer stubbornness. I pulled my rental car between a dusty pickup truck and a sedan with more primer than paint, took a deep breath of hot Texas air mixed with the smell of fried onions and coffee. I'd been sitting in my hotel room for 2 hours, trying to figure out what I was going to say to this woman who'd inherited my grandmother's life savings. How do you approach someone who's essentially a stranger, but apparently knew your grandmother better than you did? The bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and the smell hit me immediately. Bacon grease, coffee that had been sitting too long, and that particular diner smell of 1,000 meals cooked in the same space. The lunch rush was winding down. Just a few truckers at the counter, and an elderly couple sharing a piece of pie in a corner booth behind the counter. Wiping down coffee cups with a white towel was a young Asian woman with her left hand wrapped in a bulky bandage that made every movement look awkward and painful. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, and the kind of tired eyes that spoke of too many double shifts and not enough sleep. But when she looked up and smiled at me, her whole face transformed. Afternoon. Hon, take a seat anywhere you like. I'll be right with you. Her accent was pure Texas, probably born and raised right here in Millbrook. I slid into a booth near the window, the red vinyl cracking under my weight, and watched her pour coffee for the truckers, each movement careful and deliberate. Because of her injured hand, she was left-handed naturally, I could tell, and having to use her right hand for everything was making the simplest tasks take twice as long. When she came over with a menu and a coffee cup, I got my first close look at Saracen. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 26 like Grandma Eleanor had said, but she carried herself with the kind of maturity that comes from taking care of other people before yourself. The bandage on her hand was clean but worn, like it had been changed recently. Coffee to start, she asked, already reaching for the pot with her good hand. Please. I watched her pour, noted how she braced the cup with her injured hand despite what must have been considerable pain. That looks painful. How did you hurt your hand? She glanced down at the bandage, shrugged like it was nothing. Kitchen accident couple weeks ago. Grabbed a hot pan without thinking, just one of those stupid things you do when you're tired. She set the coffee pot down carefully. You're not from around here, are you? I know most of the regulars. I'm from Chicago originally, from here though, just visiting. I took a sip of coffee, surprisingly good for a small-town diner. I'm Marcus Williams. Eleanor Williams was my grandmother. The change in her expression was immediate and devastating. Her face went pale, the practiced waitress smile disappeared, and for a moment I thought she might drop the coffee pot. She set it down with shaking hands and slid into the booth across from me. Oh my God, she whispered. Marcus, she talked about you all the time. You work in marketing in Chicago, you're 28, you love old movies, and you make the best scrambled eggs she ever tasted. Tears were already forming in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I had to work, and I didn't think I should be there with family. The way she said family, like she wasn't part of it, like she was an outsider looking in, made something twist in my chest. Here was someone who'd apparently spent 5 years caring for my grandmother, and she felt like she didn't belong at the funeral. You should have been there. I said. She clearly cared about you a lot. Sarah wiped her eyes with her good hand, glanced around to make sure no other customers needed anything. She was the most wonderful person I've ever known. I can't believe she's gone. I keep thinking I should call her, or stop by after my shift, like maybe if I knock on her door, she'll answer and offer me sweet tea and tell me stories about the old days. How did you meet her? A small smile returned to her face. 5 years ago. I was walking home from work one night. It was raining, and my car had broken down again. Mrs. Eleanor was standing in her front yard in her bathrobe and slippers, trying to drag her trash can back from the curb. The wind had blown it over, garbage everywhere, and she couldn't manage it by herself. Sarah's voice got softer as she remembered. I helped her clean it up, and she invited me in for coffee. I ended up staying for 3 hours, listening to her talk about her late husband, about you and your family, about growing up during the Depression. And you kept visiting. Every few days at first, then almost every day. She was so lonely. Marcus, your grandmother, was this incredibly strong, independent woman, but she was lonely. She'd light up whenever someone came by, and I could tell she didn't get many visitors. That stung because it was true. None of us visited Grandma Eleanor regularly. I'd come down for Christmas, and maybe one weekend in the summer, always promising to call more, to visit more, but getting caught up in work and life in Chicago. She mentioned you had a brother. Sarah's expression tightened. My little brother Danny, he's got cystic fibrosis. Needs constant medical care. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, and I've been taking care of him ever since. He's in a care facility now, specialized treatment, but it costs, she gestured vaguely, more than I make here, even with the overtime. Is that why you work so much? Danny's all I have left of my family. Mrs. Eleanor understood that she'd lost people too, knew what it felt like to be responsible for someone who couldn't take care of themselves. Sarah looked out the window at the parking lot. She tried to help with Danny's medical bills, but I couldn't let her do that. It didn't seem right, taking money from an elderly woman on a fixed income. I thought about what the lawyer had said, how Sarah refused money for gas and groceries, but you let her give you other things. She made me take food home sometimes, said she'd cooked too much just for herself, and at Christmas, she'd give me presents for Danny, little things, toys or books. She said it was what grandmothers did. Sarah's voice broke a little. She called herself his honorary grandmother. The picture that was emerging was nothing like what my family had assumed. This wasn't some calculating gold digger. This was a young woman who'd found herself caring for an elderly neighbor out of simple human kindness, who'd formed a genuine bond that had lasted 5 years. Sarah, I need to tell you something. The will reading was yesterday. Her whole body tensed. The will. My grandmother left you everything, her house, her savings, all of it. For a moment, Sarah didn't react at all. Then she started shaking her head. No, that's not. That can't be right. She has family. She has you. I never asked for anything. I never expected. I know you didn't. That's what makes this so remarkable. Sarah was crying now. Not the gentle tears from before, but deep, body-shaking sobs. I can't take her house. Marcus, that's your family home. Your grandmother told me stories about your grandfather building that kitchen table, about you learning to ride a bike in that driveway. I can't. I reached across the table and took her good hand. Sarah, she wanted you to have it. She wrote letters to all of us, explaining her decision. She said you were like a daughter to her. But your family must hate me. They must think I'm some kind of, they're upset. I admitted, but that's not your fault. My grandmother made her choice, and she made it for good reasons. Sarah pulled her hand back, stood up abruptly. I need to get back to work. I can't think about this right now. I have tables to wait on, and my shift doesn't end until 10. I watched her walk away, her injured hand cradled against her side, and I understood why my grandmother had loved this woman. Sarah Chin wasn't thinking about the money or the house. She was thinking about getting back to work, about taking care of her responsibilities, about other people's needs before her own. Just like Grandma Eleanor, always haughty, spent the next morning driving around Millbrook, seeing my hometown through different eyes. The textile factory, where Grandma Eleanor had worked for 30 years, was closed now, windows boarded up, parking lot empty except for weeds growing through cracks. The hardware store, where she'd bought gardening supplies, was still open, run by the same family that had owned it for generations. Old Pete Wilson was behind the counter, same as he'd been when I was a kid. He recognized me immediately. Marcus Williams, haven't seen you in a coon's age. Sorry about your grandmother. Son, she was good people. Thanks, Pete. I wanted to ask you about someone. Sarah Chun works at Murphy's Diner. You know her? Pete's weathered face lit up. Little Sarah, course I know her, sweet girl. Comes in here every few weeks buying supplies. He leaned on the counter. She's been fixing up old Mrs. Patterson's place next door to your grandmother's house, doing the work herself, evenings and weekends, not charging a dime. Far as I can tell, Mrs. Patterson, 93 years old, lives alone. Family's all up north somewhere. Sarah noticed her porch was rotting. Roof was leaking, bought materials with her own money. Been working on repairs for months. Pete shook his head admiringly. Girl works at the diner all day, then goes over there with a toolbox. Most folks her age don't know which end of a hammer to hold. This was news to me. How do you know all this? Because she comes in asking questions about how to fix things, what kind of wood to use, how to patch a roof. Been teaching herself from YouTube videos and asking advice from anyone who'll listen. Pete pulled out a small notebook. She keeps a list of everything she buys. Says she's keeping track so she can pay Mrs. Patterson back when she gets ahead financially. Course, Mrs. Patterson don't know nothing about Sarah spending her own money. I left the hardware store and drove to the address Pete had mentioned. A small house next to Grandma Eleanor's place. The contrast was stark. Grandma Eleanor's house looked exactly as I remembered, well maintained with fresh paint and a neat garden, but Mrs. Patterson's place next door had obviously been in decline until recently. The porch had new boards mixed in with old ones, a clear sign of ongoing repairs. The roof had patches of new shingles, and someone had recently painted the front door. There was a small truck in the driveway, and I could hear hammering from the backyard. He followed the sound and found Sarah on a ladder, trying to nail a loose piece of siding back into place with her good hand. It was awkward work, made dangerous by her injury, but she was determined to finish the job. She didn't notice me until I spoke. You're going to hurt yourself worse doing that one-handed. She startled, nearly dropping the hammer, and I reached up to steady the ladder. Marcus, what are you doing here? Looking for answers. Can I hold that steady for you? She climbed down, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. I'm almost done. Mrs. Patterson's been worried about this piece coming loose in the next storm. Pete Wilson told me you've been working on this house for months. Sarah looked embarrassed. It's not a big deal. The work needed doing, and Mrs. Patterson can't afford to hire someone. She's on Social Security, barely covers her medications, and you're paying for the materials yourself. It's just a few $100s here and there. Sarah put the hammer in a small toolbox that looked like it had seen heavy use. Mrs. Patterson doesn't know. She thinks her church is helping with repairs. I didn't want her to feel bad about accepting help. I looked around the yard, noticed other signs of recent work, a small vegetable garden that hadn't been there before, new weather stripping around the doors, a freshly painted mailbox. How many people are you taking care of, Sarah? She didn't answer directly. Mrs. Patterson makes the best apple pie in town. She brings me a slice sometimes when I'm working out here. Says it's payment for the repairs. We walked around to the front of the house, and I noticed something else. That's Grandma Eleanor's car in the driveway. Sarah's face flushed. She let me borrow it sometimes when my car broke down, which was pretty often. She said it was just sitting in the garage, needed to be driven. She fumbled for keys in her pocket. I should probably return it now. I guess it belongs to me now, but that doesn't feel right. Sarah, can we sit down somewhere and talk? Really talk? She glanced at her watch. I have to be at work in 2 hours. This is important. We ended up on Mrs. Patterson's front porch, sitting in 2 old rocking chairs that Sarah had obviously repaired. The view looked directly at Grandma Eleanor's house, and I could see how she would have noticed things from here, seen when my grandmother needed help. Tell me about the day you met her. I said the real story. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, rocking slowly in the chair. I lied yesterday, not completely, but I left things out. She took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I wasn't just walking home from work. I was walking because my car had been repossessed. I'd missed payments trying to keep up with Danny's medical bills. I was working 2 jobs, the diner and cleaning offices at night, but it still wasn't enough, she continued. It was raining, and I was crying. I'd just gotten a call from the care facility saying they needed another payment or they'd have to discharge Danny. I didn't know where I was going to get the money, and I was scared. And then I saw this elderly woman in her bathrobe, trying to deal with garbage blowing all over her yard. You helped her. I almost didn't. I was wet and miserable and feeling sorry for myself, but she looked so frustrated, and the wind was getting worse. Sarah smiled at the memory. When we got everything cleaned up, she took one look at me crying and said, "Honey, you look like you need coffee and someone to listen." And you told her about Danny. Not at first. I just sat in her kitchen, drinking coffee and letting her talk. She had pictures everywhere, told me stories about each one. When she got to your pictures, she lit up like a Christmas tree, talked about how proud she was of you, how you'd made something of yourself in the big city. That made me feel worse, not better. When did you tell her about your brother? The third time I visited, she noticed I looked tired. Asked if everything was okay. I ended up crying again, telling her about Danny's condition, about the medical bills, about how I felt like I was failing him. Sarah's voice got softer. She listened to the whole story, didn't judge, didn't offer advice I didn't ask for, just listened. And then she started helping. Not money. Not at first. She'd invite me for dinner, always making too much food, then insisting I take leftovers home. She'd find reasons to give me things: a coat she said didn't fit anymore, books for Danny, gift cards she claimed she'd gotten as presents but would never use. I was starting to understand my grandmother's strategy. She'd found ways to help without making Sarah feel like charity. When did it become more than that? About a year after we met. I got sick, food poisoning from something at the diner. I missed 3 days of work. Couldn't pay for Danny's medications. That week your grandmother showed up at my apartment with soup and found out I was behind on rent. Sarah shook her head. She was so quiet about it. Just left an envelope with cash and a note saying it was a loan, that I could pay her back when things got better. Did you? I tried every month. I'd take $20 or $30 over to her house. She'd accept it. But then I'd find the money somewhere else, in my purse, in my jacket pocket, tucked into books she'd loan me. It was like a game we played. I'd try to pay her back, and she'd find ways to give it back without hurting my pride. The picture was becoming clearer. Sarah wasn't someone who'd taken advantage of an elderly woman. She was someone who'd tried desperately not to be a burden, while accepting the love and support my grandmother was determined to give. What happened to your hand? Sarah looked down at the bandage. 3 weeks ago. Busy lunch rush. I was carrying too many plates, trying to keep up. I slipped in the kitchen, put my hand out to break my fall, and it went right through a glass dish that someone had left on the counter. She flexed her fingers carefully. Needed 18 stitches, and I can't grip things properly yet. You're still working. I have to. The diner doesn't offer health insurance, and I can't afford to miss shifts. Danny's medications cost $800 a month, plus the facility fees. She was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother came to see me in the emergency room. She was the only visitor I had. What did she say? She held my good hand and told me that sometimes life tests us to see how strong we really are. She said I was the strongest person she'd ever known, and that she was proud to call me family. Tears were running down Sarah's face again. She said family takes care of family, and that I should let her help more. I told her I couldn't, that she'd already done too much. But she was planning something bigger. I had no idea about the will. Marcus, I swear to you, she never mentioned leaving me anything. We never talked about money or inheritance. I just knew that she was getting older, that she needed someone to check on her, to make sure she was eating and taking her medications. I believed her. The woman sitting next to me, crying about an elderly neighbor she'd cared for out of pure kindness, wasn't capable of the kind of manipulation my family was imagining. Sarah, there's something else you need to know. My family is talking about contesting the will. Her face went pale. They can do that. They can try, but I don't think they'll succeed. Grandma Eleanor was careful, had mental capacity evaluations, worked with a lawyer who's known her for decades. I paused. The question is, what do you want to do? I don't know, she whispered. I never expected this. I don't know how to live in a house that big. I don't know anything about managing money. I'm scared I'll mess it up somehow, that I'll dishonor her memory. You won't. You're exactly the kind of person she'd want to have her things, someone who understands what it means to take care of people, to put others first. Sarah was crying again, but softer now. I miss her so much. Marcus, she was like the mother I lost, the grandmother Danny never had. She made me feel like I wasn't alone in the world. Sitting there on that porch, looking at my grandmother's house, I finally understood what she'd done. She hadn't just left her estate to Sarah, she'd left her a family, a place to belong, a foundation to build on, and she'd given me something too, a lesson about what family really means, about recognizing love in all its forms. Come on, I said, standing up. Let me drive you to work. We need to talk about what happens next. The confrontation I'd been dreading came that evening at Grandma Eleanor's house. Uncle Robert had called a family meeting, and everyone was there: Jake and Michelle, Patricia and her husband Tom, plus a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. They were gathered in the living room, where I'd spent countless childhood hours, but the atmosphere was anything but nostalgic. There he is, Jake said as I walked in, the family traitor. Patricia looked up from a legal pad covered with notes. Marcus, thank God. Tell us you've talked sense into this Sarah person. Tell us she's agreed to give back what's rightfully ours. I sat down in Grandma Eleanor's favorite armchair, the one where she used to read me stories. I've talked to her. She has no intention of giving up the inheritance. Uncle Robert slammed his hand on the coffee table. I knew it. Gold digger sees dollar signs, and suddenly she's family. He pulled out a folder thick with papers. I've been doing research on this Sarah Chin dropped out of college, works minimum wage, lives in a rundown apartment complex. She targeted Mama specifically because she knew about the money. That's not true, and you know it. How would you know? Michelle spoke up from the couch. You haven't been here. You visit once a year, call on holidays. This girl's been manipulating Grandma Eleanor for 5 years while we weren't paying attention. The accusation hit home because there was truth in it. I hadn't been there, hadn't been part of my grandmother's daily life, but that didn't make Sarah the villain in this story. Have any of you been to Murphy's Diner? I asked. Have you actually met Sarah? We don't need to meet her. Patricia said, we know her type, young, pretty, preying on lonely old people. It's a classic scam. She's not pretty in the way you mean. I said she's tired and overworked and taking care of a disabled brother. She's been repairing her neighbor's house with her own money, working double shifts, trying to keep her head above water. Jake laughed harshly. Oh, so now she's a saint. Poor little orphan girl story, right out of the con artist playbook. I looked around the room at these people I'd grown up with, people I'd shared holidays and family traditions with, and realized I was seeing them clearly for the first time. They were angry about the money, yes, but there was something else underneath: guilt. When's the last time any of you visited Grandma Eleanor? I asked. The room went quiet. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Michelle found something fascinating about her fingernails to examine. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. We all had our own lives, our own families to take care of. Mama understood that, did she? I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the notes I'd taken during my conversation with Pete Wilson. I spent today talking to people in town: Pete at the hardware store, Linda at the grocery store, Dr. Martinez, who was Grandma's physician. They all knew Sarah. They all knew about the relationship. Patricia waved dismissively. Small-town gossip doesn't mean anything. Dr. Martinez told me that Grandma Eleanor listed Sarah as her emergency contact 2 years ago. I continued. Linda said Sarah did Grandma's grocery shopping every week, always paid with her own money, and bought extra food to stock Grandma's pantry. Pete said Sarah was in his store every other weekend, buying supplies to repair Mrs. Patterson's house. So she was building a reputation, Jake said, making herself look good to the neighbors. Part of the long con. I stood up, walked to the mantelpiece where Grandma Eleanor kept her family photos. There were pictures of all of us at various ages, but I noticed something new: a small framed photo of Sarah and a young boy with oxygen tubes in his nose, both smiling at the camera. This is Danny, I said, holding up the photo. Sarah's brother. He has cystic fibrosis. Grandma Eleanor kept his picture on her mantel next to ours. Uncle Robert's expression softened slightly, but he shook his head. Look, Marcus, I'm sorry about the kid's illness, but that doesn't change the legal situation. This girl manipulated our mother into leaving her everything. What if she didn't? I sat back down, leaned forward. What if Grandma Eleanor made this decision because she wanted to? What if she saw something in Sarah that reminded her of herself at that age? Like what Patricia demanded, like someone willing to sacrifice everything for family, someone who puts other people's needs ahead of her own, someone who understands that love isn't about what you get, it's about what you give. The silence stretched on. Jake was the first to break it. Even if that's true, it doesn't mean she should inherit everything. We're blood family. We have a right. Do we? I looked around the room again. How many times did you call Grandma Eleanor last year, Jake? He didn't answer. Patricia, when's the last time you invited her for dinner? Thanksgiving, Easter. How about you? Uncle Robert, when did you last spend an afternoon just sitting with her, listening to her stories? Uncle Robert's face was getting red. That's not fair. Marcus, you live in Chicago. You're just as guilty. You're absolutely right. I am guilty. I let work and distance and my own selfishness keep me from being the grandson she deserved. But at least I'm not trying to punish someone else for filling the gap I left. Michelle spoke up, her voice defensive. We all loved Grandma Eleanor. We're here, aren't we? We came for the funeral. Sarah wanted to come to the funeral, I said quietly. She worked a double shift that day because she couldn't afford to take time off, but she would have been here if she could. She would have been in the front row, crying harder than any of us. Patricia was crying now, real tears this time. She was our grandmother. Marcus, she raised Uncle Robert when their parents died. She helped us all through college with those little checks she'd send. She was supposed to leave us something to remember her by. She did leave you something. I said she left you the knowledge that when she needed help, when she was lonely and scared and getting older, someone was there, someone cared enough to show up every day, someone loved her enough to put her needs first. The room was quiet except for Patricia's sniffling and the tick of the grandfather clock that had been in this room for 40 years. Uncle Robert spoke first, his voice subdued. What are you saying, Marcus, that we should just accept this, walk away from our mother's entire estate? I'm saying we should trust her judgment. She was the smartest, most loving person any of us knew if she chose Sarah. She had good reasons. But the money, Jake said weakly, the house, it's worth so much. To who? I stood up again, walked to the window that looked out on the front yard where I'd learned to ride a bike, where Grandma Eleanor had pushed me on a tire swing. This house was never about the money for her, it was about family. About having a place where people belonged. Sarah needs to belong somewhere. She's been taking care of everyone else her whole adult life. Maybe it's time someone took care of her. Tom, who'd been quiet through the whole conversation, finally spoke. What about Danny, the boy with cystic fibrosis? What happens to him? Sarah uses the inheritance to pay for his medical care. I said she gets to keep her brother healthy and safe. Maybe even bring him home to live with her in a house big enough for his equipment. That's what Grandma Eleanor would have wanted, a family taking care of family. The silence that followed was different this time. Thoughtful rather than angry, I could see the internal struggle on everyone's faces, the disappointment about the money warring with the recognition that maybe, just maybe, Grandma Eleanor had made the right choice. Michelle was the first to speak. I want to meet her. Everyone turned to look at her. Jake frowned. What? If we're going to accept this, if we're really going to let some stranger inherit everything, I want to meet her. I want to see for myself what kind of person she is. Patricia nodded slowly. That's fair. I think we all should. Uncle Robert looked around the room, saw the shift in mood. All right, but I still think we should have our lawyer review the will. Make sure everything was done properly, not to contest it, he added quickly. Just to make sure Mama wasn't pressured or confused. She wasn't. I said, but if it makes you feel better, go ahead. Jake was staring at the photo of Sarah and Danny that I'd left on the coffee table. How old is the kid? 16. He's been sick most of his life. Sarah's been taking care of him since she was 19. Jesus. Jake muttered. That's younger than Michelle was when we got married. Michelle picked up the photo, studied it carefully. They look happy. They do. I agreed. Even with everything they've been through, they still have each other, still have hope. Patricia wiped her eyes with a fresh tissue. When can we meet her? I'll ask her tomorrow. Maybe she's scared of all of you, thinks you hate her. We don't hate her, Uncle Robert said slowly. We just don't understand. You will, I promise. The next morning, I drove to Murphy's Diner early. Before the breakfast rush, Sarah was already there, prep work for the day, moving carefully because of her injured hand. She looked up when the bell chimed, and I saw the worry in her eyes immediately. Marcus, is everything okay? My family wants to meet you. Her face went pale. Oh God, they're going to yell at me. Aren't they? They're going to tell me I'm a terrible person for taking their grandmother's money. Some of them might, but not all of them, and not for long. I slid into the same booth we'd occupied 2 days before. Sarah, they're not bad people, they're just hurt and confused. They loved Grandma Eleanor too, and they're trying to understand why she made the choice she did. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know why she chose me either. Yes, you do. You know exactly why she chose you. You just don't want to admit how special you are. Sarah turned away, busied herself with wiping down tables that were already clean. I'm not special, Marcus. I'm just someone who happened to live in the right place at the right time. You're someone who saw an elderly woman struggling with her garbage in the rain and stopped to help. You're someone who worked double shifts to pay for your brother's medicine and still found time to repair your neighbor's house. You're someone who refused money from a woman who wanted to help you because you thought she needed it more. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, they wouldn't. That's the point. That's what made you special to her. The breakfast crowd started filtering in. Truckers and early shift workers who knew Sarah by name, who asked about her hand and her brother, who left bigger tips when they thought she wasn't looking. This was her community. These people who'd watched her work and struggle and never complain. What time do you get off today? 4 o'clock. Why? Because my family's coming here at 4:30. They want to meet you, to understand who you are and why Grandma Eleanor loved you. Sarah's hands were shaking as she poured coffee for a trucker at the counter. I can't do this, Marcus. I can't sit there while they ask me questions and judge me. I'm not good at talking to people about personal things. You talked to me. That was different. You loved her too. You understand what it's like to miss her. They understand that too, even if they don't show it very well. I finished my coffee, left money on the table. Sarah, you don't have to justify loving my grandmother, and you don't have to apologize for accepting her love in return. Just be yourself. Tell them the truth. That's all she would have asked of you. At 4:25 that afternoon, I was sitting in Murphy's Diner with my entire extended family crammed into 2 booths. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone dressed up like they were going to church. Everyone trying to look anywhere but at each other. Jake kept checking his phone. Patricia was reorganizing the contents of her purse. Uncle Robert was reading the same page of a newspaper over and over. Sarah emerged from the kitchen at exactly 4:30, Having changed out of her work uniform into a simple blue dress and cardigan, she'd attempted to do something with her hair, but it was still damp from washing dishes, and her injured hand made it impossible to manage properly. She looked terrified. Sarah. I stood up. I'd like you to meet my family. What followed was the most awkward round of introductions in family history. Everyone shook hands politely, mumbled their names, avoided eye contact. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper as she invited everyone to order something. Anything, coffee at least. Uncle Robert, bless him, took charge. We'll all have coffee, honey, and maybe some of that pie, if you've got any fresh apple pie, Sarah said quickly. I made it this morning. It was Mrs. Eleanor's favorite recipe. The mention of my grandmother seemed to break some of the ice. Patricia looked up sharply. She gave you her recipe? She taught me how to make it, said her mother taught her during the Depression, and she wanted someone to carry it on. Sarah disappeared into the kitchen, returned with a fresh pie and a stack of plates. I was going to bring a piece to her grave this weekend. I thought she might like that. Michelle's expression softened. That's sweet. As Sarah served pie and poured coffee, the questions started gently at first. Then with more confidence, Uncle Robert asked about her brother. Patricia wanted to know about her parents' accident. Jake inquired about her education and work history. Sarah answered everything honestly, her initial nervousness giving way to the natural warmth that had attracted my grandmother in the first place. You dropped out of college, Tom observed, not accusingly but with curiosity. I was studying to be a teacher, Sarah explained, but when my parents died, Danny needed full-time care. I couldn't manage school and work and his medical appointments. I always planned to go back someday. What would you study? Michelle asked. Special education, maybe nursing. I've learned so much about medical care, taking care of Danny. And there are so many kids like him who need advocates. Uncle Robert set down his coffee cup. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? She nodded, though I could see her tense up. Did you ever think about what would happen to you if something happened to Danny? God forbid. But his condition, what if you couldn't take care of him anymore? It was a cruel question, but Sarah answered it with grace. I try not to think about that, Mr. Robert, but I suppose I'd probably keep working at the diner. Maybe get a second job again. I've been on my own before. You've never thought about getting married, having a family of your own? Sarah's cheeks turned pink. I've never had time for dating, taking care of Danny. Working, it doesn't leave much room for a social life. Besides, he is my family. He's all I need. Patricia leaned forward. What about when he gets older? What if he wants to live independently? Then I'll help him do that, Sarah said simply. Whatever makes him happy, whatever gives him the best life possible, that's what matters. Jake had been quiet through most of the conversation, but now he spoke up. Sarah, what did you think when you heard about the will, when you found out Eleanor had left you everything? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I thought there had been a mistake. I couldn't understand why she would do something like that. She had a real family, people who loved her. I was just a friend. But you were more than that, Patricia said softly, weren't you? She made me feel like I was more than that. She treated me like I mattered, like my opinion was important. She remembered everything I told her about Danny, about work, about my dreams. She'd ask how he was doing, if he was eating enough, if his treatments were helping. Michelle wiped her eyes. She did that with all of us when we were kids, remembered everything, worried about everything. She showed me pictures of all of you, Sarah continued, told me stories about Marcus learning to drive, about Patricia's wedding, about Robert's promotion at work. She was so proud of her family. Uncle Robert's voice was gruff. Then why didn't she leave us anything? Why give it all to you? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the question. I think maybe because I was there when she was scared about getting older, when she had trouble opening jars or reaching things on high shelves, when she felt invisible because everyone was busy with their own lives. I saw her. I made sure she knew she mattered. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was the silence of recognition, of people finally understanding something important. What will you do with the house? Patricia asked. I don't know yet. It's so big, so beautiful. I grew up in apartments. I don't know anything about maintaining a house like that. Sarah paused. I was thinking maybe I could turn part of it into a care facility for kids like Danny, a place where families could get help, where children with chronic illnesses could have the support they need. Uncle Robert's eyebrows went up. That would be expensive. Mrs. Eleanor left me enough money to make it work, I think, and I could keep working at the diner part-time, at least until it got established. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she talked about her idea. She always said the house was meant to be filled with people who needed love. Maybe I could make that happen. Jake looked around the table at his family, saw the same recognition in their faces that I was feeling. This wasn't a gold digger or a con artist. This was exactly the kind of person my grandmother would have wanted to carry on her legacy of caring for others. Sarah, he said slowly, I owe you an apology, we all do. We assumed the worst about you, because we were hurt and angry, but Grandma Eleanor knew what she was doing. Didn't she? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. She told me once that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up. About being there when someone needs you. She said I'd shown her what family really means. Patricia was crying openly now. We should have been there, we should have been the ones checking on her, taking care of her. You couldn't have known, Sarah said gently. She was very independent, very proud, she didn't want to burden anyone. But you weren't a burden to her, Michelle observed. And she wasn't a burden to me, she was a gift, the closest thing to a mother I've had since I lost my own. Uncle Robert pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card. Sarah, I'm going to give you the name of my lawyer and my accountant. They'll help you manage the inheritance properly. Make sure you don't get taken advantage of by anyone. I can't pay for legal advice. You don't need to, it's family. The word hung in the air, and I watched Sarah's face transform as she realized what he'd said. She wasn't just inheriting my grandmother's money and property, she was being accepted into the family. There's something else, Patricia said, pulling out her phone. We want to meet Danny, we want to understand what Eleanor saw in both of you. He's in a care facility in Austin, Sarah said. It's about an hour drive. We'll follow you, Jake said, this weekend, if that works, as we prepared to leave Murphy's Diner. Sarah pulled me aside. Marcus, I don't know how to thank you. You could have sided with them, could have tried to talk me into giving up the inheritance. Grandma Eleanor was counting on me to understand. I said she knew that if I spent time with you, I'd see what she saw. What's that? Someone worth loving, someone worth trusting with the most precious things in her life. Sarah hugged me then, carefully because of her injured hand, and I realized that my grandmother had given me something, to a new understanding of what family means, a broader definition of love, and a sister I'd never expected to find that weekend. We all drove to Austin to meet Danny, a 16-year-old boy with his sister's gentle spirit and his honorary grandmother's stubborn determination to find joy despite the circumstances. He was small for his age, thin from the effects of his illness, but his face lit up when he saw Sarah walk into the common room of the care facility. Sarah, did you bring the pictures of Mrs. Eleanor's garden? He asked, then noticed the group of strangers behind her. Who are all these people? These are Mrs. Eleanor's grandchildren, Sarah said, kneeling down to hug him. They wanted to meet you. What followed was one of the most moving afternoons of my life. Danny showed us around the facility, introduced us to other patients and staff members, talked about his treatments and his hopes with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who'd been sick most of his life. He knew every detail of Sarah's work schedule, worried about her injured hand, asked if she was eating enough. Uncle Robert, the most skeptical of all of us, spent an hour playing chess with Danny, and came away shaking his head in amazement. That boy's got the mind of an engineer, and the heart of a poet. No wonder Eleanor loved him. As we prepared to leave, Danny pulled Sarah aside, and I overheard him whisper, "Are they nice people, Sarah? Do they make you feel safe?" "They do," she whispered back. "I think Mrs. Eleanor would like them." Then I liked them too, on the drive back to Millbrook. Uncle Robert called me. "Marcus, I want to help with Sarah's idea about the care facility. I've got contacts in healthcare administration, people who could advise her on licensing and regulations." Patricia called an hour later. "I want to organize a fundraiser for Danny's medical expenses, even with the inheritance. Sarah shouldn't have to handle everything alone." Jake's call came that evening. I talked to Michelle, and we want to invite Sarah and Danny for Christmas. We've got plenty of room, and it seems wrong for them to spend the holidays alone. By the time I flew back to Chicago the following week, my family had essentially adopted Sarah and Danny. They'd set up a trust fund for Danny's ongoing medical care, arranged for legal and financial advice for Sarah, and begun planning the conversion of part of Grandma Eleanor's house into a respite care facility for families dealing with chronic childhood illnesses. 6 months later, I was back in Millbrook for the grand opening of Eleanor's house. Named in honor of my grandmother, the facility could accommodate 6 families at a time, providing temporary housing and support services while children received treatment at nearby medical centers. Sarah had completed her GED and enrolled in online nursing classes, working toward the degree she'd abandoned years earlier. Danny was doing well enough to move back in with Sarah, his bedroom equipped with all the medical equipment he needed, but decorated like any 16-year-old's room: posters of basketball players, science fiction books, a computer where he played games with friends from around the world. His prognosis was still uncertain, but he was stable, happy, and surrounded by people who loved him. The day of the grand opening, I found Sarah in Grandma Eleanor's kitchen, now her kitchen, making apple pie from the recipe she'd been taught 3 years earlier. She moved with confidence now, her injured hand fully healed, her shoulders no longer carrying the weight of the world alone. Nervous, I asked. Terrified, she admitted, then smiled. But excited too. Eleanor's house is going to help so many families, people like me and Danny, who need a place to belong while they're fighting the hard fights. She would be so proud of you. I hope so. I think about her every day, wonder if I'm making the right choices with her gift. You are the care facility, bringing Danny home, going back to school. She wanted all of this for you. She wanted you to have the chance to build the life you'd put on hold. Sarah finished crimping the edge of the pie crust, slid it into the oven. Marcus, can I tell you something? Of course. The night before she died, Eleanor called me. She'd never called that late before, said she couldn't sleep, wanted to hear a friendly voice. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She told me she'd been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. She said she didn't want to be remembered just for the money she saved or the house she maintained. She wanted to be remembered for the love she gave. She told me that love multiplies when you share it, that the best inheritances aren't things but opportunities to make a difference. Sarah wiped her eyes with a kitchen towel. She said she was giving me the chance to love more people, to help more families, to carry on what she'd started. Through the kitchen window, I could see the first families arriving for the grand opening, children with various medical conditions, parents who looked exhausted but hopeful, siblings who understood what Danny had been through. The parking lot was filling up with cars, and I recognized several members of my extended family among the volunteers. Look at that, I said, pointing to the activity outside. Sarah looked out the window and smiled. She's here, isn't she? In all those people, in all that love being shared, she's still here. She always will be. As we watched, Danny appeared in the backyard, leading a tour. Group of kids his own age around the playground that had been built with donations from the community. He was talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands, his oxygen tank forgotten as he focused on making the other children feel welcome. He's going to be okay, Sarah said softly. Whatever happens with his health, however long we have, he's going to be okay. He knows he's loved. He knows he matters. That's Eleanor's real gift to us, not the money or the house, but the knowledge that we're not alone in the world. I put my arm around Sarah's shoulders. This woman who'd become my sister through the magic of my grandmother's wisdom and love. None of us are alone, we're family now, all of us. The timer chimed, and Sarah pulled the pie from the oven, golden brown, and smelling like childhood memories and new beginnings. As we carried it outside to share with the families gathered to celebrate Eleanor's house, I realized that my grandmother had achieved something remarkable. She'd created a legacy that would outlast any building or bank account. She'd taught us that the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's the capacity to love, to sacrifice, to show up for people who need us, and in the end, that's a gift that keeps giving, one generation at a time. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone special in your own life, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Your support helps us share more stories about the power of love, family, and the unexpected ways people come into our lives to change everything. Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and let us know in the comments what family means to you.